We all have our demons.
Not enough pain.
What's up, YouTube? It's Kale Rien, aka Chugmug, aka Saladolin, aka Video Bobo XE, aka Video Bobo, aka Bobby D. How's it going, everybody? I'm here with another video today to talk about the death of tier sets in Battle for Azeroth for World of Warcraft. If you happen to be here and you don't know what a tier set is, we're going to school. So tier set in the past has been a set of armor you receive from a raid that matches up to that raid's tier. So basically the sort of the numerical value of the raid, and gives you a set of armor items that you can collect that are class specific for your character. There have been 21 tier sets, or 21 tiers, it'd probably be easier to say, each with a varying number of class sets based on the number of classes in the game at that point in time. So it started off originally in Vanilla WoW with 9 tier sets, and it's expanded ever since then to 12, with the addition of Death Knights, Monks, and Demon Hunters in subsequent expansions, with Demon Hunters now having the fewest number of tier sets at 3, and that'll be an all-time record until they decide to reverse course, if they decide to reverse course on this decision. Tier sets are usually pretty cool because they're class-themed armor that oftentimes also relates back to the theme of the raid tier that it came out of. Icecrown Citadel and Wrath of the Lich King, for example, was sort of a very undead, dark, icy theme. So a lot of the raid sets reflected that. You had Death Knight sets with skull motifs, which realistically is pretty much all Death Knight sets, but they also had cool little frosted motifs as well, with like glowing, sort of like smoky, like frost-like energy. Similarly, like the Paladin set had a skull motif with like light coming out of the skulls. So there's a cool intersection when done right, between the visual theme that matches both the class and the raid that it comes out of. Tier sets also are a bit of a problem for Blizzard because they bring in these tier sets that you can see on screen here. Tier set basically gives you an incentive for having multiple pieces of gear from the same set on by giving you an additional bonus that's specific to that set. They've become a gigantic problem for Blizzard and for balancing and for the community at large during Legion for a few reasons that we're going to talk about today. So currently, the situation that exists and sort of the problem that people have with tier sets is that with 6 pieces per tier set, so main armor sets plus a cape, you actually have the ability to mix and match to get 3 different tier set bonuses. You can get the 2 and the 4-piece bonus from one set, and you can get a 2-piece bonus from an additional tier set. Most commonly what this has been in Legion is somebody really likes their Tomb of Sargeras 2-piece, but their 4-piece from the original tier of Legion, the Nighthold and Emerald Nightmare tier, might go back and get 4 pieces of that tier set. Now, in the past, this wasn't really a big problem because the lower the tier set was, the lower its item value was. The item level attached to it was lower and would never be higher. So it was effectively time-locked in that way. It could never have better stats. It could in no way get good enough stats to make it necessarily worth wearing. The problem with Legion is that they've introduced the War and Titan Forging system, which allows any gear that drops randomly to be upgraded to receive more item level and therefore more power. It is now possible, although hard, to do for one of the tier 19 sets, that would be that Nighthold tier, the first tier of Legion, to Titan Forge and upgrade to be on par with the Tomb of Sargeras tier 20 tier sets. If you're a casual player who does like sort of low level raiding like I do, like you do normal and heroic and you have fun and you're not really interested in, you know, a 10% extra performance boost from all these hours of additional effort, it's not really going to affect you negatively that much, bar a few edge cases we'll talk about here in a second. However, if you're a Mythic Raider playing top-end progression, there's a bigger problem, which is that often you have a group that is solely interested in doing things to get that 3% or 5% performance improvement, and they will go to great lengths to get it, including farming the old tier on Mythic difficulty, hoping specifically for Titan Forged gear. Couple that with the relinquish token system added for catch-up, both on Broken Shore and on Argus, and you can see how this is a bit of a problem. There's basically all these different ways for you to just burn out spending a lot of time farming tier sets for extra bonuses or extra Titan forging that in the past just didn't exist. The game didn't have those options before, so it never really became a problem until now. Compounding this is the problem of Legion legendaries. These items can be pretty cool and pretty powerful. The problem is that for a lot of classes and specs, the slots that those legendaries occupy are tier set armor slots. You might have a cape that's your best in slot legendary. You might have a chest that is a best in slot legendary. And when you're trying to get 3 different set bonuses, a two piece from a second set, and a 4-piece bonus from one of those sets, the challenge of having a legendary that uses one of those slots is massive. It can make evaluating your gear decisions almost impossible. It can make the choices that you make around gear feel really limiting, especially if your 2 best legendaries, since you can wear 2, occupy tier armor set slots. You might then have a problem with equipping your base tier set if you don't get the right drops or you're not lucky enough. It creates this whole sort of knock-on effect where just by adding Titan forging into the game alone, and then also adding legendaries on top of that, it creates this massive feedback loop where you're constantly trying to game out the right way to gear up. This can be cool. It's one of the choices in an RPG that's interesting on paper because it's kind of fundamental and core to what an RPG is. You're looking for ways to maximize your player power, but it's so much choice that it often becomes overwhelming, and evaluating that choice is difficult to do in a vacuum. Everyone has different ideas about how it balances, how it works, and that often makes this tricky. Blizzard saw this feedback, and their decision with Battle for Azeroth, the upcoming expansion, was to say that there's no longer a need for tier sets at all.
We will not.
They'll just strictly be removing them. I'm of 2 minds about this. I think a lot of the WoW community that I've seen is of 2 minds about this, because on the one hand, it's frustrating in Legion the way it's currently played out, that with Titan forging or other various gear mechanisms, you may end up in a situation where your tier set just doesn't work very well for you, or where you want to wear a lot of your tier set, but you just can't because of legendaries or other lockout items that you must have on. On the other hand, I think that this has the potential to actually be a very good decision for a couple of reasons. But let's talk about it from the gameplay perspective first, and we'll go into art and some other things here momentarily. So from a gameplay perspective, taking out tier sets with nothing to replace the benefits they provide is a net loss. Removing a tier set basically just prevents you from having a choice of a bonus to improve your player power. These bonuses can be underwhelming depending on how good the design team is doing at that point in time at maximizing your class's effectiveness, but it's probably pretty decent. Very rarely have I seen people actually get like a set bonus that's absolutely garbage and completely worthless, especially in the modern era from Warlords of Draenor on, where set bonuses are actually unique per spec rather than trying to design sort of a one-size-fits-all that says, like, if you're a mage, for example, in prior expansions, your tier set bonus would often be this really shitty thing where it was like a paragraph of text to describe how a fire ability, a frost ability, and an arcane ability would give you a certain buff in different ways. And that was your 2-piece and 4-piece. You'd have to read 2 paragraphs of text on a tooltip to actually have any sort of comprehension as to how an ability would work. And to give you an example of that, I can go to the Dungeon Journal in-game literally right now, and we can pull up an old tier set and take a look. So if I look at Icecrown Citadel's raid gear, and I filter it specifically for mage, basically your DPS specs were the best example of this. And then I have to actually find such a piece of armor, which I don't think is going to be in here now that I'm thinking about it. Right, it's not. Well, shit. You get the idea. Anyways, so you'd have to read 2 paragraphs of text on a tooltip to understand how your tier set could affect your gameplay. That in and of itself is not bad. I think it's a good idea that players be able to read and understand how gameplay mechanics will affect the way that their characters play. But it was overly complicated, and sometimes the bonuses, when they tried to tie all of these different things together into one bonus, they could often be hit or miss for certain specs. Since Warlords of Draenor, they've been a lot better, because the set bonuses now are very specifically tailored to your spec. So they can be very, very different bonuses rather than having to be sort of a one-size-fits-all ability. So from a gameplay perspective, if nothing replaces set bonuses, losing tier sets really sucks, because that is an interesting gameplay choice that we're currently able to make that this future state would disallow. Now, the other side of the gameplay equation is that not having tier sets is positive in one way, in that it opens up player choice. I'll now have options for gear in every slot, and especially those tier slots that I used to have and used to have to basically reserve for my tier armor will now give me a better choice or range of choices in theory. Again, this all depends, of course, on how Blizzard actually implements the idea. So it could be good, it could be terrible, we don't know yet. The other side to it, however, is that we already know that, at least from Blizzard's perspective, without knowing much more about the system itself, there will be a replacement for tier set bonuses in Battle for Azeroth, and it's being done with the Heart of Azeroth system. What the Heart of Azeroth is, supposed to be at least, is a necklace that, with enough investment of value through a system called Azerite, which basically functions like Artifact Power currently does in Legion, you'll be able to empower certain slots of armor. I believe it's head, shoulders, and chest. Might be pants, actually, one of the 3. But there are 3 slots of armor, effectively, where you're going to receive what looks like a weird sort of radar option. And as you level up your Heart of Azeroth to certain levels with Azerite, the gear that's in those slots will open up new options for you to pick, basically sort of a binary choice. You'll have a couple of options in that radar ring at that level, and you'll be able to choose one or the other. So you'll be able to invest. At least that's how we currently understand it. We don't know much about it in terms of how it's actually going to work or what the abilities are, but that's what we saw at BlizzCon, and that's all I can tell you currently about it. What we do know, besides that, is that these maps are not randomized. They're specifically tied into the item that is dropping. They're specific to that item, and they remain the same across any version of that item. So getting a mythic version of your your head armor piece is always going to be better than a heroic version, which is always better than a normal version, and vice versa. What we don't know is how those abilities are going to work, what they're going to do, if they're going to be able replacements for a tier set or not. But the other thing we know is that those slots will not Titan Forge. So gear that has Heart of Azeroth upgrades tied to it can't upgrade. It's always going to be the same item level regardless of when it drops, how it drops, what state the moon's in when it drops. It's always going to be the same item level. So that helps a little bit in that it means that stuff that's tied to an upgrade mechanic in game will always be of a predictable level of power. Now, what we don't know yet, again, is the value of those stats or those traits. From what we saw at BlizzCon and the brief previews and ideas that were kind of thrown out there, the potential exists that some of these could be as good as old tier sets, or tier set bonuses rather, but from what I saw of a lot of them, I don't know that they're going to necessarily be as good as a tier set. They will fundamentally alter your gameplay in little ways, so they have a little bit of overlap with both tier set bonuses and with Legion legendary effects. However, we just don't know what those bonuses are yet, so it's hard to actually judge the value of the announcement of the removal of tier sets on that front, but there is one place where we can be a little more objective with the information we have, and that's with the art assets. So the biggest detriment to the removal of tier sets, in my opinion, is that we lose unique class visuals from armor. The armor that drops in Battle for Azeroth will now be themed on where it drops from. So our first tier intro raid is Uldir, the Halls of Control, and that is a Troll/Titan themed raid, meaning that all of the armor that drops from it is going to be Troll or Titan themed, or some sort of intersection between the two. What we've been told about the decision to axe tier sets is that the art team is going to have more time available to create more unique looks, and also they'll then be bringing some of the effects that we currently associate with mythic armor sets onto lower difficulty sets. So the visual fidelity of everything in the game is going to be getting a bit of a boost from that. But again, all we know is that that's the promise that Blizzard's making, is that losing tier sets will be totally worth it for the art that we're going to get. Besides just the visual flair of it, the other thing that they've frequently stated is that the intention here is that the armor should better match the raid it comes from. Introductory level raid tiers are always kind of shitty in this regard, in that there's multiple different raids, and it's really difficult to theme a good raid set that fits both. For example, in Warlords of Draenor, our first tier of raids was both Highmaul and Blackrock Foundry. So a lot of our raid armor during that time either looked like ogre shit, it looked like orc shit, or sometimes it looked like both. So you'd often get raid pieces that would drop in one raid or the other that, because they used the tier set armor assets, would not fit the raid that they belong to. So you might get like a nice cool Draenei Paladin set that's kind of made to look like crystally, like an ogre made it, but it drops in Blackrock Foundry and makes you think, hey, how did they get this? Where did this come from? It's better if you look at it even more recently, when you look at Legion and the difference between Emerald Nightmare and Nighthold. Pretty much all of the armor that drops from the tier sets in Tier 19, which is the Nighthold and Emerald Nightmare tier, looks like it fits Nighthold really well. There's runes and magical stuff and sort of lithe, very simple shapes that are elegant, like what elves would wear. But that same stuff then for offset pieces drops in Emerald Nightmare, where it doesn't fit. It's bright, it's colorful, it's cheerful in some cases, because it comes from an elf civilization that once upon a time was actually really bright and shiny and hopeful. And in Emerald Nightmare, it looks completely out of place, because Emerald Nightmare's theme is a world of darkness. It has never been hopeful or bright in Emerald Nightmare. Of course, when it turns to the Emerald Dream, maybe it fits there, but then there's still the magical runes and everything else that are on the armor sets in Nighthold that still don't really fit. So Blizzard's promise is sort of twofold with this. We're supposed to be getting a similar amount of overall armor looks, but we're going to be getting better themes that fit the locations that the armor comes from, and it's going to give us a bit better diversity of those looks, while also giving us more doodads, particle effects, and details on the lower tier sets. I hope they can pull that off, because the thing that I look at and think about when I look at tier sets is that I like having multiple sets with class aesthetic. It's awesome to have options, especially if you're a class that's been in the game for a long time. I originally mained Priest. So as a Priest, I would have 21 different options for tier set looks that all are made to sort of embody the visual hits and theme of my class. And that's without counting class-specific in-between sets like the Encourage armor, which looked more like Encourage armor than Priest armor, but you get the idea. Now, on the good side, though, I do feel like there is one positive to not having class-specific armor drop in raids anymore, and that is that oftentimes, especially for well-established classes, it's really fucking hard to get a good, different theme every time you do a tier set. To go back to my previous example, yes, priests have 21 different armor tiers once Antorus launches this week that they can draw from, and all have some sort of different aesthetic. However, about half of those sets are some variation of fantasy trope meets the Roman Catholic Pope. So some variant of cloth sort of buckety hat, some sort of weird simple cloth shoulder, lots of like longer cloth bits to emphasize like cleanliness and holiness and all of that shit. And it often just kind of comes across feeling samey. Same thing goes with another common priest theme, especially for end tiers in the last couple of expansions. Like literally the last 3 expansions, Legion included now, have all done this, which is the last tier priest armor is some variation of robes and then the shoulder pads including wings. There was Turnian Glory in Siege of Orgrimmar, which was a nice pointy wing. There was the Vestments of the Pious in Hellfire Citadel, which, you guessed it, had a big wing, but it was on the front. And oh, hey, the Mythic one had like a weird fell demony like bone wing. So I guess that's kind of different. And our current Antorus tier armor has flat shoulder pads that are more of a gilded look with, you guessed it, feathery wings on top. There are some classes that do better at this game than others, but generally, when you look at a tier and its armor look, it's about 50-50 on good armor sets to just armor sets. And is being generous to Blizzard, because some of the armor sets that I've collected over the years are kind of bad. They are kind of shitty. Every class has repetition of similar themes. Paladins almost always get at least one tier in expansion where they are forced to wear some sort of plate dress that, if it were made real, would sort of be an achievement of physics. Paladins must have a lot of strength to carry around all of that plate armor. Similarly, warriors tend to get a lot of very simple looking plate armor sets because their whole theme is that they are simple looking savages. Because it's the Fury class and spec fantasy that really plays heavily on how armor is visualized for that class. Rogues get a lot of basic looking leather. And sometimes they get weird stuff that looks really out of place, like the shoulders for the Antorus tier. They have an awesome looking sort of pirate, like actual like pickpocket kind of getup with a cool like tricorner hat. And then they have these weird like rounded shoulder plates that look like they're made out of actual plate and kind of don't fit the rest of the set. So there's a lot of weirdness and things like that that permeate raid sets. For every good raid set your class has, there's probably a bad raid set, and there's probably a worse raid set. That's especially true with the color variants that we started getting in Wrath of the Lich King for all the different difficulties. Like Priest, again, for example, the recolors of the Tier 3 set they used for Naxxramas, the 10-person variant was like poop brown with gold accents. I know that the intent was that it was supposed to look kind of golden and nice, but how it actually looked was like shit. Thankfully, the 25-man version was a much better color palette, but I will never forget being so excited to get my Tier 7 robe that you could get at that point without having to do the raid if you saved up enough of your badges, and finding out that it was poop brown. Not a high point in my WoW career. So overall, I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how this works. I like the idea of having better themed raid sets that closely fit where they come from. I feel like that's a small immersive detail that helps a lot in a game where sometimes immersion is not like a peak concern. I'm also curious to see the gameplay implications, particularly for Heart of Azeroth, because I think that there's a lot of potential there for it to be better in many ways than tier set bonuses, but there's also a lot of room for that to be worse, and that's what I worry about when I look at this system. I'm also curious to hear more about outside of raiding, how that's going to translate. Class-specific sets are also used for PvP, And in years past, basically they've been recolors or reworks of the raid sets that match that same arena season. Will we get class sets for PvP in Battle for Azeroth? What will they look like? And then similarly, we have the class hall sets that were introduced in Legion for another class-specific look option. Will we have something like that continuing into Battle for Azeroth? Will we have a newer, updated version of that mechanic somehow? Or will it be a factional set that'll be like faction leather, faction cloth, faction mail, faction plate? I feel like that's probably going to be it now that I just said it out loud, but I'm just real curious to see, because there's a lot of potential options for this and a lot of potential directions this can go in. And right now, other than that tier sets are gone, we don't know what's going to happen. And it'll be really interesting to see what Blizzard does going forward. But anyways, that's it for this video. If you liked what you watched here, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I will be putting out multiple videos a week. I'm also going to be streaming 6 nights a week on twitch.tv/KaleRien. If you like what you saw here, come check it out. It'll be more freeform and hopefully a little less stuffy. And if you're interested in reading some of my thoughts in a longer form, I also have a blog at kalerien.wordpress.com. Check it out, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.